The world of Left 4 Dead is full of unsolved mysteries and unexplained phenomena, from crazy unreleased special infected to insane stories of UFOs and skinwalkers. This series has it all. If this is the first video you're seeing from my Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg video series, go watch the first video if you're interested. That video only covered the first 2 layers, while this video will be covering layers 3 and 4. We're moving down the iceberg a bit, so the topics will be a bit more strange than the ones in the last video. Just in case you don't know how an iceberg video works, it's an iceberg cut into various layers, with the ones at the top being relatively known by the community, but as you make your way down, the topics will get darker and less familiar. I showed it briefly in my last video, but I did make this iceberg myself. Some of the entries were taken from other charts. Shout out to the Ultimate Left 4 Dead iceberg, some entries are from there. Before we jump into the video, if you enjoy this content and like what I do, please consider subscribing. We just recently hit 30k, so I want to give you guys a huge thank you. As always, if this video reaches 1,000 likes, I'll post some baby bunny pictures on my community tab. But with all that out of the way, let's dive back into the waters of the Unsolved Mystery Iceberg Explained. The first entry for today's video and for the third layer is the AI director watches you play. To further understand this entry, let's take a little bit of time to explain what the AI director is for those who might have forgotten or aren't familiar with the term. In Left 4 Dead 1 and 2, the AI director is essentially an AI that formulates and decides how each match will play out. The director can decide to alter some of the map's geometry, like in the beginning of the Parish, it can block off the door behind the bar, and later in the Parish, it can also change around the cemetery. In addition to manipulating the maps, the director is also in charge of weapons and item spawning. While there are differences between the modes, the director can spawn more or less health items depending on the state of the survivors, and can even spawn more hordes or even a second tank if you're doing very well. What does this entry mean when I say the director watches you though? Well, because of the nature of the director and how it has the power to wipe your team or keep you alive, many players feel watched when they play the game. You can take the word watch in a literal sense and argue that it does watch you play. How else would it know what you're doing? While most players acknowledge the director as just a simple yet complex gameplay manipulation tool, some players can't just scratch that feeling like something's sitting behind their screen. Personally, I've never felt this way. I've had people in the past point out that it is a bit weird, but I view it as incredible. The fact that the director can change so many things keeps the game fresh and the replay value high. Let me know if you guys have ever felt watched by the director. I might just be the exception. The Leaker is the name of the next entry, and before writing the script for this video, I hadn't even heard this term before. From what I gather online, the Leaker was either a cut special infected that never officially made it into the game, or was the original idea behind the Boomer or Spitter that just changed as development went on for the game. According to this Reddit post I found, it was a cut special infected that was supposed to plant itself on the ground and explode after a few seconds, dealing a lot of damage to nearby survivors. Then it would leave behind a small pool of acid or fire where it exploded. There's no concept art of this creature as far as I'm aware. It was most likely an idea that was thrown around during development and it just stayed that way. Others point out that there's code or files that have something to do with the Leaker, but as far as I'm aware, I don't know if they have any direct correlation. In addition, I found another Reddit post that claims the Leaker never actually existed. According to the post, the author states, quote, "Hey there, many of you know of the infamous cut special infected, the Leaker, which has spawnable code in-game. I discovered Chet Falazek on TikTok, who worked on Left 4 Dead, and asked him about the mysterious infected, as I found it strange that an infected likely cut late in development never even as so much had concept art." And according to his reply, the Leaker never existed. Though he doesn't explain the coding in-game, likely just some experimenting with things, he affirms that throughout his time working on every single special infected in the game, there was never an infected like the Leaker, which clears up a huge misconception in the fandom. End quote. There are mods on the workshop that attempt to add the Leaker in one way or another by using or reusing the Boomer, but it appears the Leaker is nothing more than an urban legend. The next entry is another one of those topics I didn't really know existed until I had a chat with one of my fellow content creators and friends, Payne. This topic is about the white CEDA agents in the Parish. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, let's discuss the normal uncommon infected versions first. Throughout the course of the Left 4 Dead 1 and 2 campaigns, there's a chance for uncommon infected CEDA agents to spawn in. They only ever spawn in two different colors, yellow and green. Alongside the fact that they wear these puffy, bright colored suits, they're immune to fire. In the campaign Dead Center, you can commonly find them on the lowest level of the burning hotel. As we shift our attention back over to the Parish, the CEDA agents, if they spawn in the first place, will only spawn in as green or yellow. They're not incredibly common, but you can see them in like the first level, for example. However, if you make your way to the second chapter of the Parish, you can find two dead white agents. As far as I'm aware, this is the only place you can find this coloration. What's their significance? Why is this important? Well, by the time our survivors make it to the Parish, the military has taken control. I've operated under the assumption that the military worked with CEDA at this checkpoint in New Orleans, but what if they never worked with them? What if they completely replaced them? People in Louisiana would have been opposed to the idea of the military stepping in. We know this because of what they've done in some of the surrounding areas as well as the other safe zones. Thus, in order to fully take control, it's not outlandish to believe the military essentially cosplayed as CEDA to gain the trust of the public only to bring them to their demise. We can see Humvees behind the checkpoint and buses that seemingly go nowhere, all in an attempt to fool the masses. All this comes from the fact that the CEDA agents are just simply a different color. If you've seen this anywhere in the game, I tried to look, I couldn't find. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but this theory could be completely wrong. They might just be white because it was an oversight during development. It's an interesting story, but take it with a grain of salt.
For all of you guys that don't already know me, my name is Payne, or it's just Payne on YouTube. And I'm something of a Left 4 Dead fanatic, but I primarily focus on the military, which is why I'm doing a section on how the military began retreating westward. The Left 4 Dead games paint a pretty damning image of America's once shining military, falling back from choke point after choke point, constantly outnumbered and outmatched. Every time they seem to take a step forward, they take 10 steps back. They deploy artillery, fighter jets, thermobaric bombs, and in the end, none of them can match the pure destructive capability of the green flu. Our survivors walk through fallen military safe zone after military safe zone. Abandoned weapons of war that crushed human armies in the field are reduced to nothing more than a decorative ornament on the barren metropolises our survivors limp through. The military has abandoned all hope of stopping the infection and has begun to act strictly for saving what's left of the population. By the time our survivors make it to Georgia, the United States military is sprinting westward, hoping to destroy any connecting transportation routes, trapping the infected and the living in the east. With the new border of the United States hastily drawn by American weapons of mass destruction, the surviving military has no intention of repeating its shortcomings. The military has learned, adapted, and begun to overcome its failures. Players have speculated that the remains of the United States military could be preparing a counteroffensive of massive proportions, possibly from staging grounds in Colorado, Wyoming, or Montana, states with dense concentrations of military installations. With their newfound knowledge that a population with any remnants of the green flu is the same as a population entirely infected by the green flu, the military may seek to destroy any remaining non-militarized population centers, effectively leading to a scorched earth strategy. Changing the military from America's first defense to a force tasked with eradicating an infection far faster and far more coordinated than they could ever understand.
The Screamer is the next entry on my list, and similarly to the Leaker, it was a cut special infected. The Screamer was a special infected that had its arms bound in a straitjacket and would wander around until noticing survivors. Upon seeing the survivors, the Screamer would scream extremely loud, alerting nearby infected, thus spawning a horde. After screaming, the Screamer would run away, forcing players to follow it and take it down. To my knowledge, the first ever mention of the Screamer was in the Left 4 Dead 1 developer commentary. In that commentary, one of the developers describes the mechanics I told you about. They also mentioned that during the playtest for Left 4 Dead 1, playtesters would not understand what to do when faced with the Screamer, and that the running mechanic made it hard for new players to learn about the Special Infected before they were punished for not knowing its mechanics. After some more testing, the Screamer was eventually reworked into the Boomer, the Special Infected we all know and love today. The developers state that the reason they ended up with the Boomer and not the Screamer was because of what I mentioned earlier, but the Boomer breaks that rule that every player immediately defaults to: shoot anything that moves. In modern day, the Screamer is nothing more than a cut special, but it's interesting to know that the Screamer was far enough into development that playtesters actually got their hands on it. Like with the Leaker, you can find mods in the workshop that attempt to recreate the creature, but the Boomer is an overall improvement, so I don't see any reason to have it in other than a one-time experience. Let's just move on. The next entry is one of the more interesting ones. The green flu didn't originally turn people into infected. This theory stems from the idea that CEDA and the government seemingly had enough time to make flyers and set up operations before anything really bad happened. In the beginning of the Left 4 Dead 1 cinematic, we see that it's only been 2 weeks since the first infection, so the green flu must be extremely contagious, or there might be something else at play here. Yes, the green flu is still extremely contagious no matter what I say, but imagine if the first couple of strands of the infection didn't turn its hosts into the infected we know of. What if these people just simply got sick, and only after a couple days did the green flu mutate into what we know of it now, causing hundreds to turn almost simultaneously? This could also provide a reason as to why its initial spread seems so quick. There's further proof of this in the Sacrifice comic. In it, we see the backstories behind our Left 4 Dead 1 survivors, but for the sake of this entry, I want to pull your attention to Lewis's backstory. We see him in his office as he goes about his day. He eventually has to use the bathroom, where he runs into one of the infected in a nearby stall. How did an infected get all the way up here unnoticed? That's just it didn't. When the man first came into work, he hadn't completely lost his mind. Only after succumbing to the infection did he turn and completely lose his shit. This further shows how contracting the infection doesn't turn you instantly at this time. Throughout the games, we also see people arguing on safe room walls about how long it takes to turn, specifically on the last chapter of No Mercy. What if the infection didn't just change people at random? What if it originally took days or even weeks, only to eventually mutate and then take less time? It's up to you on whether or not you believe this theory. I'm not 100% in agreement on all this, but it does fit the narrative pretty nicely. Let me know what you guys think of this down below. Infected are hive minds. Now this entry is very interesting. For those of you who don't know what a hive mind is, let me explain it real quick. A hive mind is usually made up of multiple entities but only shares a single mind, as the name suggests. In other forms of media, the smaller details are a bit different, like some individuals can get cut off from the hive mind, but usually every individual that's a part of the hive mind can send and receive info from its leader. That's not to say there's one infected that rules them all, more so that they all experience and work together. Some players theorize that this is the case, that the experience of one infected could transfer to all the others via this hive mind. Personally, I don't believe in the hive mind theory myself. There's many reasons. For starters, you can come across multiple groups of infected in an area and only get the attention of a handful of them. There's usually a couple still wandering around or just lying about. If we were to assume that all the infected were part of this hive mind, why wouldn't all of them immediately turn and start targeting the player after a couple infected notice them? Some have pointed out that the evidence of this hive mind exists through the special infected. Take the Spitter for example. The Spitter was a special infected that mutated later on in the canon at the time of the Left 4 Dead 2 campaigns. The government would have been deploying riot police, and in response the hive mind could have evolved some of the infected into a Spitter to counteract humanity in some sort of way. I think the Spitter and all the other special infected mutations for that matter are a result of the rapid mutation of the green flu, and not because the hive mind decided exactly what it needed. If the infection was indeed a hive mind, that'd mean it could essentially gather its forces and launch a full-scale assault. While we don't see anything like this in game, some players are still convinced the infection shares a single mind. The next entry is about another video game, Payday, and its ties to Left 4 Dead. Many of you might remember that I talked about this in the other series, so I'll try to keep it short. In Payday 1, there was a DLC introduced into the game that saw the player enter No Mercy Hospital to complete some sort of high priority mission. Upon loading into the game, you can spot Bill in the elevator. It's not a 100% chance, but there is a decent possibility. Throughout the mission, the players can explore a version of No Mercy Hospital, as the developers inevitably had to make changes to the layout for the purpose of game gameplay reasons. According to some players, you can hear a witch inside a nearby room. I haven't played the game in a while, but I faintly remember hearing this. The mission essentially has you extract samples from a patient and then analyze it. After finding the right sample, the player is forced onto the rooftop where they make escape via helicopter. When I originally talked about this level, I got a whole bunch of different theories in my comment section. A lot of players believe the Payday crew is responsible for the outbreak due to this mission. I feel like I shouldn't really have to say this, but some players truly believe the universe is connected. In the same way Dead by Daylight has Left 4 Dead characters in it, it's just a crossover and nothing much more. It is an interesting thought to entertain, but I won't lie, some players just take it a bit too far. I think it was a fun DLC, that's about it. Let's move on. We have now made it to the 4th layer. The first entry on this layer is Lost E3 builds. This entry is a reference to the versions of Left 4 Dead 1 and 2 that were shown off at the E3 conventions, and how those versions of the games are lost to time, unfortunately. Just in case you didn't know, E3 or Electronic Entertainment Expo was a major annual trade show for the video game industry, primarily focusing on showing off games and new hardware, similarly to the Game Awards, just without the awards part. You can find footage online that uses assets from these builds, but to my knowledge you can't play them in any way. Since these builds existed earlier on in development, there are a lot of differences. Most notably are the character designs for each of the survivors. The Left 4 Dead 2 survivors had their clothing colors completely changed. Coach dons this bright blue and yellow shirt instead of his purple and sand colored one. Rochelle's shirt is bright and orange instead of pink. Ellis's shirt is white while his jumpsuit is orange. In the background of the trailer you can also notice changes to the levels. It's hard to make out because the footage is so old. You can also find gameplay from E3 as well. One of the biggest differences I noticed was the hand movement. It's the one they used in Left 4 Dead 1. While it's an interesting look back on the very little amount of information we have about these builds, it's sad that we'll never fully be able to experience them in their true glory. Modders have taken it upon themselves to add the differences throughout the workshop, but nothing would be as good as getting our hands on one of these builds. The next entry is titled Virgil's Fate, and I've talked about this entry before, so let's get through it quickly. This entry is a reference to the boat driver who helps our Left 4 Dead 2 survivors navigate from swamp fever to hard rain, and finally finishing his journey by bringing them to the Parish. Virgil is the name of the boat driver, and we know this because the survivors have countless voice lines calling him by his name. I believe he also introduces himself at the beginning of Swamp Fever, right before he picks you up. Besides our survivors, I'd make the argument that Virgil is one of, if not the most important character. He sticks with our survivors for 3 whole campaigns. Some players point out that his name comes from Virgil in Dante's Inferno, in which that Virgil leads Dante through the 9 circles of hell. That parallels the way he guides our survivors through the infection. The last we see of Virgil is at the end of the Parish, where he mentions he's going off to help other survivors. In terms of the lore, Virgil has to be a character. There's no way he could have survived that long while in contact with our survivors without catching the infection. After all, our survivors are carriers, so they would have infected him. Virgil most likely dies after the events of the Parish due to some of the military actions within the region. There's no way the military was bombing all of New Orleans just to let one boat escape, but we don't know for sure, so he could still be alive. The next entry is Terror Strike Early Build. For those of you who don't know, Left 4 Dead didn't originate with the style we associate with it today. Left 4 Dead originally began as a mod for Counter-Strike Source called Terror Strike. Footage of the mod exists online, and you can tell by looking at it that this was just a proof of concept. It had essentially enemy AI wandering around trying to knife you, the way zombies try to run at you and melee you. You would just walk around and shoot them. I believe there was also like a bomb placement mode. No special infected or anything like that existed at the time. It's a very interesting look into how they made the game without actually making the game, if you know what I mean. Nowadays, there's not a very good reason to seek out and play this mode. Only players with a deep interest in Left 4 Dead and or older Valve projects will give it any thought. I mean, we have Left 4 Dead, so why play a watered down, neutered version? It is an interesting look though. The Midnight Riders Are Alive is the name of the next entry. This entry is a reference to the rock band that's first introduced in The Passing. Most of you will be like, wait, what? I thought they were first introduced into Dark Carnival. While yes, that campaign did come out first and did feature these characters, The Passing DLC takes place before the events of Dark Carnival and also features the characters. On the walls of some of the alleys, the player can find these posters advertising the Midnight Riders as they make their way on tour. Later in the level, there's a chance to catch a glimpse of them as they pass by in their tour bus. At this point in the timeline, Whispering Oaks, the location of Dark Carnival, wouldn't have been overrun, and it's only right before our survivors arrive at that campaign does that area finally fall. Once our players make it to the end of Dark Carnival, you can find posters of each of the band members along with their tour times. Inside the safe room, you can even spot wall graffiti of people arguing about their supposed escape. Someone mentions that they escaped via helicopter after they ran out of buses, while others mention how unfair that is. This makes me wonder if the helicopter that picks up our survivors is the same helicopter that brought the Midnight Riders to safety. If we look back at their tour schedule, we can see that there are still places they have to go. Did they go on to finish their tour? We may never know. It's rather unlikely that they got the chance to finish it, as almost the entire West Coast would have succumbed to the infection. I would have loved it if we got a single campaign DLC where we got to play as the Midnight Riders. That'd be awesome. But let's go into the next entry. The next entry is a bit of a darker one. The Left 4 Dead 2 survivors die at the end of the Parish. Some players within the Left 4 Dead community have speculated about the eventual fate of our second group of survivors. You see, unlike the first group of survivors, the second group didn't get a comic series explaining what happened to them, but we can use a couple context clues to try and figure out what truly happened. Throughout the events of the Parish's campaign, our survivors become less and less trustworthy of the military. They see the atrocities they've committed and all the people they've killed, not to mention they're bombing the city they're currently walking through. When our survivors reach the end of the campaign, they talk to a couple of military guys over the radio, in which one of the guys on the radio asks the helicopter pilot if they're prepped for carriers. The helicopter pilot responds with a yes, and our survivors fight across the bridge until they make it to the helipad, where they're eventually lifted off to safety. People believe that once they land, they're probably put into some sort of camp where they're eventually killed. But if we're going to kill them, why risk waiting for them and even grabbing them in the first place? I heard online that the writer behind the story mentioned that our survivors were taken off to a cruise ship off the coast. I don't know how true that is, so take it with a grain of salt, but it's pretty sad to know that they could just have died and we might never see them again. These last two entries were both in my original series, so I'm gonna go through them pretty quickly. The first entry is about the glowing eyes in Dark Carnival. When you load up Left 4 Dead, there's a chance for the background to be a scene from Dark Carnival. If you sit here long enough, behind one of the structures, a zombie will peek its eyes out from behind a corner before another zombie closer to the camera walks into view, and then the glowing eyes disappear. When I first brought this up in my other series, people were telling me that it's a COD Zombies Easter egg, but I don't know if I believe that. I think it was probably just a small nod to how the actual infected have glowing eyes, and the devs just probably wanted to creep everyone out. The last entry for today's video is about the witches on Hard Rain. While playing through the events of the Parish, the player will stumble upon a sugar mill that's filled with tons of witches. Players have speculated that the reason so many witches spawn is because of the sugar. They point out how an explosion could have occurred, causing the sugar to jettison all over the place. And with the witches being depressed, they are more attracted to sugar. According to Google, when you're depressed, you crave sugar. Other theories range from explosions killing the husbands of witches prior to the infection, and that's the reason they still hang around the place searching for their husbands they'll never find. I don't really know which theory I'd go with. I mean, the only one that sounds plausible is the sugar theory, but the community seems to disagree with themselves on this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I just wanted to reiterate that this is the second part of this whole Iceberg series I'm doing, so if you haven't already, go check out the first video. If you made it to the end of this video, you already know that this video is starting to cover deeper and stranger topics. That's about all I have for you guys today. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Have a nice rest of your day. Peace out.